A friend of mine hosted a dinner last year, small gathering, maybe 14 people, a quiet restaurant she'd reserved a month ahead. One of the guests had nearly 10,000 followers online. He'd been posting about it for days leading up, countdown stories, location tags, the works, but when the evening finally arrived, he was barely present. Phone up between every course, tilting plates toward the light, refreshing his screen to see who was watching. At the end of the night, the host said something under her breath, not aimed at him specifically, just quietly into the air. He was here. But he wasn't really here. 10,000 strangers received a curated highlight. The 14 people sitting at that table received a fraction of a human being, but there was another guest. No phone out, no stories, just conversation. He asked follow-up questions from talks they'd had half a year before. He left without capturing a single image. The next morning, the host messaged him first, just to say his presence had mattered. That gap between 10,000 distant viewers receiving a performance and 14 real people receiving less of a person than they deserved, that's exactly what I want to explore today. The psychology behind people who never felt drawn to document their lives, or who eventually walked away from all of it, is far more layered and meaningful than most conversations give it credit for. Let me begin with the part that's rarely said out loud. Not everyone who left social media did so from a place of clarity or strength. For many, something pushed them out. A painful breakup made the contrast between their private grief and everyone else's public joy unbearable. A period of deep loneliness made the scrolling feel like pressing a bruise. Someone shared something real, something honest, and it was either ignored completely or misread entirely. That unreciprocated vulnerability leaves a mark. It doesn't simply fade with time. For a significant number of people, logging off wasn't a conscious, well-reasoned choice. It was closer to quietly leaving a room where you kept getting hurt. And that deserves to be said plainly, because the idea that private people are simply more enlightened is a story that's a little too easy. Sometimes they're people who got burned and decided the fire wasn't worth returning to. That's a real and honest reason. What's worth paying attention to is everything that comes after. Almost without exception, people who step away describe a particular shift that happens a few weeks in. Something internal settles. It's not the relief of avoiding something frightening. It's more like a hum you'd completely tuned out was suddenly switched off, and the absence of it reveals just how loud it had been all along. When you ask what they miss, most pause for longer than you'd expect, and then they say something like, honestly, not much. There's actual research behind why that internal quieting happens. A study from the Journal of Consumer Research discovered that simply anticipating sharing an experience, even before doing so, caused people to enjoy that experience measurably less. The mental preparation of packaging a moment for an audience begins pulling you away from that moment before you've even reached for your phone. You are simultaneously living something and constructing it for outside consumption. Those two modes of being are in direct competition. The memory that forms is thinner. The emotional imprint left behind is lighter. People who never shared or who eventually stopped felt that drain even without being able to name it scientifically. At some point, they simply refused to keep paying that cost. These are often the same people who were told, growing up or later, that something about them was off. That their reluctance to perform their life publicly must mean they had something to hide. There's a particular kind of suspicion that gets directed at anyone who opts out of the visibility economy. As though choosing not to be watched is itself a form of confession. For people who spent years being made to feel strange for this instinct, finding out that there's genuine psychological grounding behind how they've always moved through the world. That doesn't just feel like validation. It feels like finally being handed a language for something you've carried silently for a long time. The psychological concept most relevant here is called private self-consciousness. It describes a person's tendency to turn attention inward, to examine their own interior experience rather than tracking how they appear to others. People with high private self-consciousness are not withdrawn from life. They are, in many ways, more closely engaged with it, just from the inside. They ask themselves what they actually feel about something rather than how that something looks from the outside. They notice the real texture of an experience rather than immediately framing it. In a culture that has quietly rewired nearly everything around outward performance, that inward orientation can feel like a flaw. It isn't one. What it builds over time, and this is not automatic or immediate, is a self that doesn't need outside confirmation to remain intact. That is genuinely uncommon. Most people are running a low-level background process almost constantly. Are people engaging with what I put out? Do I appear to be doing well? Does my life seem like enough? Private people, whether by deliberate decision or by instinct developed over years, have largely stepped off that treadmill. The social friction that creates is worth being honest about. When you stop broadcasting, you become harder to monitor passively. People who were maintaining a loose sense of connection through your posts now have to make an actual effort. Many of them won't. Certain friendships thin out and eventually disappear, not through conflict but through the simple absence of the effortless touchpoint. That loss can sting quietly for a long time. But something else tends to emerge. The people who do reach out, who send a message or suggest meeting, turn out to belong to an entirely different category of person than the ones who were simply following along. And the longest-running study on human well-being ever conducted, the Harvard Study of Adult Development, which followed participants across more than 8 decades, found one result more consistently than almost any other. The quality of your close relationships is among the most powerful predictors of lasting health and happiness available to us. Not the number of connections, the depth of them. The guest who remembered what you said months ago and received that message the next morning, that's not a small thing, that's the entire point. There are generations of people who still carry a memory of life before any of this existed, before silence became something you had to justify. Many of them describe the same quality when they try to explain it. Life felt more like theirs somehow, not flawless, not free of difficulty, but theirs. There was a weight and a texture to ordinary days that didn't require documentation to feel real. That instinct, the ability to simply let something exist without immediately translating it into shareable content, is something younger generations are now having to deliberately work to recover. Because it no longer arrives naturally. The people who never lost it or who fought their way back to it carry a presence that others often notice without quite being able to explain. They're simply in whatever is happening. No part of their attention is already composing a caption. People call that peace, but I think it's something more precise than that. It's ownership. The quiet, unshakable sense that your life belongs to you in a way that years of public performance quietly erodes without you ever noticing the loss. So if you spent years feeling like something was wrong with you for not wanting to share, if you left and people treated your absence like a symptom, if you've always held your life close not out of fear, but because it felt like yours and handing it over never quite made sense, you were never behind. You were simply further along in a direction the rest of the world is only now beginning to turn toward. If this reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. If it made you think, consider liking it. It genuinely helps hidden mindscapes grow and keep making content like this. There's more waiting for you on screen right now.